We want to talk to you about what it means for us as Southerners on new ground to work in a place, this region, this land, this culture, a place that has a legacy of both slavery and the most extraordinary resistance and creation of liberation, side by side. So that we work in that environment. We work in the environment of a history of oppression and a history of liberation. That's our work. We carry those one in each hand. We live in a place that has this huge urban center of Atlanta, and it's a place of small towns and rural areas. And we have those small towns struggling to survive in the face of development, in the face of jobs being eliminated. So we're working both of those. We live in a place that has enormous amount of immigration historically and up until the moment. It runs always all the way from the Scotch-Irish, the indentured servants, convicts, poor people searching for some better way of life, to the immigrants of today. We work in that, carrying all of that history in our hands from Appalachia to the southernmost tip of Florida. We live in a place that has church folks who believe that any kind of sex outside of traditional marriage or the missionary position. And we live with some church folks who are some of the bravest, smartest, most liberatory people that you could possibly ask for, who offer the services to people that can't get services through the government, who go to Katrina when Katrina hits and pulls people out of the water and says, "We will feed you." We live with one of those in one hand and one with the other. So we live in a place that you could say is a place of contradictions, but in some way it isn't, because both of those connect to each other. That there's not like the bad guy and the good guy. There's this complexity that we live every day. And so, since the current growth of the right wing, which is where we get to the sex, politics, and God, comes out of a tremendous rebellion against the gains of the civil rights movement. And since it was the right wing that politicized churches, politicized them, particularly in the South, moved that politicizing all around the country, that we have to think about this as a stronghold of the right wing. And I'll give you just a little bit of personal history, and then we will go into this. I grew up in a little place called Hog Mountain, which is 45 minutes northeast of Atlanta. And I grew up in the church. I grew up on a farm as youngest of 8 children. I grew up with this heavy sense. I knew exactly when they said you sit in the front so you be holy. And I said, oh, not in the back where you be backsliders. I know all that language. You see this butt? Worn out on a church pew when I was a teenager. It took me years of exercise to get me muscle in my butt. That's why I had basketball in high school. College. Still trying to, not wear my butt out, just watching basketball now. I know the church. You all, probably lots of you, and a lot of you Southerners, you know the church. And you know sexual repression. You know how, for those of you who are my generation, you know how courtship and foreplay were carried to the highest level of sexual pleasure because you couldn't have the sex itself. Because of the sexual repression. You know about sex connected to secrecy and how thrilling that is and how horrible that is. You know all of that. And then we got to watch, starting about 1979. Not only that there's that history of the church having this problem with sex, that's kind of church all the way over, Catholic, Protestant, having this problem with sex. And you have then something called the moral majority form. And that moral majority sets up an agenda that takes sex. I forgot to put it on my list here, even though I just realized I created this. I'll put this over. Moral majority created in where? Who was the leader of it? Jerry Falwell. What grand state of the South did it come
Virginia.
out of? Virginia, yeah. How many are here from Virginia? Got y'all. Thank you. Can't believe it, I put this up. Sex and sex education. So, what the moral majority did was set out an agenda, looking at all the new evangelicals who had developed in the South, and said this is a voting bloc. We're going to get them on values. We're going to bring them in, and by God, see, already got that, by God. By God, they brought them in. They brought them in, and what did they do? They elected Ronald Reagan. Everybody with the program? Here's the agenda. Feminism was rolling. It was built now out of the resentment against the civil rights movement. But the values agenda used coded racism and did overt attack against feminism, homosexuality. Follow that? Okay. So anything that promoted women's autonomy, anything, but in particular, to focus on the horror of reproductive choice. These were the ways to focus people in. They fell into this beautiful strategy. And so this one became, and still remains today, the center point for moving people, coalescing people, getting people to join. Nobody was saying LGBT, they were saying homosexuals. Well, they were saying other words too. This is the kind of word. And this was positioned, these two, feminists and homosexuals, were positioned as the people who were breaking down society. And then there was the sex education, anything that had to do with sex in terms of sexual liberation. And we had come out of the 60s, into the 70s, so there was a response to that. But this, I think, for many of us in the queer movement, we have not focused as much as who is going to own the definition of family. And that's what they said coming out. We will own the definition of family, and it's going to be a very narrow definition. It wasn't the definition of marriage. Marriage was an assumption. It was a definition of family, of who makes up a family. This is a place where we have actually offered a lot, and a lot of disruption, because look at us. Look at the multiple ways we create family. And the harder we push that, the closer we get to. Closer we get to liberation. So we've been on a little bit of an odd journey with marriage, when this is the one that the more we push, the more we don't push traditional, the more we push all of the wildness of creativity and the way in which we connect with one another. Because that's where we're connected with the majority of the rest of this country. Those families are not what they were. And they've never been what they were, but certainly not what they were in that traditional view. Any questions?